Here are two guests with years of experience dealing with nuclear policy issues and Iranian sanctions. Mark Dubowitz, Executive Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Joe Cirincione, President of Plowshares Fund, author of Nuclear Nightmare, Securing the World Before It's Too Late. Gentlemen, we're here after years. After years of having you both on the program. I know you're friendly and you both have had talks at some of the highest levels, but you come from very different point of views on this one issue. And we're going to have a real conversation if it kills us today and try to answer one basic question. Is this deal making us more or less safe? Mark?
Well, Jenna, first of all, congratulations to Joe. I know he's advocated for this deal, and he deserves a lot of praise today. But Joe owns this deal, and this deal is going to make the world and the United States less safe. What we're essentially doing is, over time, we're handing the leading state sponsor of terrorism a expanding nuclear infrastructure that will give it near zero breakout and easier clandestine sneak out. We're enriching this regime that's killed hundreds of Americans. We're providing it with billions of dollars to actually fund the Assad government and terrorist proxies around the world. And this deal will convert a nuclear pariah over time into a respectable member of the nuclear community. This is still the same revolutionary regime, and over time, this regime will become more dangerous on all fronts.
Joe?
As you would expect, Jenna, I completely disagree. Every president since Ronald Reagan has tried to stop and roll back Iran's nuclear program. 4 presidents have tried, 4 have failed. President Obama may have just found the right formula. This deal will shrink-wrap Iran's nuclear program. It cuts it dramatically, removing most of the centrifuges, removing an astonishing 98% of the uranium gas, ripping out the core of its plutonium production reactor, cutting off every pathway to a bomb, and then wrapping that program in the most intrusive inspection and verification regime we've ever seen negotiated. It's not perfect, but it is an excellent start.
So, Joe, let's say that does happen, that Iran never, ever gets a nuclear weapon. What about Mark's point about Iran's role as a state sponsor of terror, gaining other weapons because the arms embargo is relaxed here, and the mischief that they're doing in the region, but also around the world? What about that aspect?
Yeah, there are very many aspects of Iran's behavior that we object to, and we're going to continue to fight that. For example, we're not dropping the sanctions on their human rights or terrorism violations. We're not dropping the sanctions on their ballistic missile program. Look, this deal is not a fix-it mechanism for everything. It doesn't cure cancer. It's not going to help you shed those unwanted pounds. It does one thing and one thing only. It stops Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, and that's a pretty big deal.
Is that worth something, Mark? I mean, having no nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists sounds like a good thing.
Jenna, it sounds like a good thing, but Joe is not telling you the reality. The reality is, over time, Iran gets an expanded nuclear program. After 10 years, some of these restrictions begin to disappear. After 15 years, most go away. Iran actually gets an unlimited enrichment capacity. They can build multiple heavy water reactors. They get to build heavy advanced centrifuges that are much easier to hide. This inspection regime, this unprecedented inspection regime, will be carried out by a small UN agency. This is a fundamental, massive, historical bet on our ability to inspect what will be an industrial-sized, massive nuclear program in the hands of a revolutionary regime with hundreds of billions of dollars. This is creating a threshold nuclear weapons state over time, Jenna. This is not shrink-wrapping anything.
I want you to respond to it in this way. You know, I was watching the president's announcement with my 10-month-old. And the president is talking about the way forward with Iran. And this is where policy really becomes our reality, right? My son is 10 months old. In 10 years, he's going to be almost turning 11. What will he face at the end of that 10 years, Joe?
Yeah, well, this is a very complicated agreement. I am proud to own this, and I'm trying to read it all. But this deal locks up Iran's program for longer than it's actually been in existence. Some of it does expire after 10, but most of it keeps going for 15 years, 20, 25. And the ban on making nuclear weapons, the inspection regime, that's like diamonds. It lasts forever. So it's only one step. What do we do in the next 10 or 15 years? What kind of Iran do we want to see, and what are the programs that we can put in place to make sure that Iran changes and doesn't become the country we see now in 10 years from now?
Let me ask Mark about that. Mark, Joe brings up this point that over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, our dealings with Iran haven't been affected in the way that they continue to be a huge state sponsor of terror, and they continue not to be the partners that they we want in the region. If we could choose and develop a partner, Iran would not meet that character that we would choose. So does this give us an opening over the next several years just to change what we've done over the past and maybe establish something different with Iran? Is there a glimmer of optimism there?
Jenna, there's always a glimmer of optimism, but I prefer not to be optimistic when it comes to the Middle East. We usually are too optimistic when it comes to the Middle East. This is the same revolutionary regime. It is a state sponsor of terrorism. It has killed hundreds and maimed thousands of Americans. I don't want to bet your son and my son's future on the glimmer of hope that this revolutionary regime will change. Joe is making that bet. He is making a fundamental, transformative bet that this will be a different regime in 10 years. Joe, I hope and I pray you are right. Joe, I think based on Middle East history and Iranian nuclear history, you will be wrong. And then what you've essentially provided is this regime with an industrial-sized, near-zero breakout in nuclear program, hundreds of billions of dollars to fund its regional expansionism and fund terrorism. And that's not a good bet, Joe.
Joe, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but I also want to play a little sound here, just for some historical context, because we don't even need to just look at the Middle East to wonder if past is precedent. And Joe, we've talked about this before, but I'm going to play a little sound for our viewers. There's a lot of comparison being made to the Soviet Union and the United States engaging in the Soviet Union and for advocates of this plan saying, look at that, we did that once, it's going to work for us again. But there's actually a situation that some have said is more parallel and more recent history. Here's President Clinton talking about the nuclear deal with North Korea.
This agreement is good for the United States, good for our allies, and good for the safety of the entire world. It reduces the danger of the threat of nuclear spreading in the region. It's a crucial step toward drawing North Korea into the global community.
We know what happened approximately 10 years later. We think we have a deal. We don't have a deal. North Korea is now a nuclear state. Why is this different than that, Joe?
The North Korean agreement was about 4 pages long. This thing is over 100 pages long. Nothing is being left to chance. Everything is being written down to make sure there's no wiggle room, there's no mistakes. And then our job is going to be to enforce this agreement over the life of this agreement. That's a generation worth of enforcement that we have to do. Look, not every agreement is perfect. It could be some mistakes, but I have the same hope that Ronald Reagan had when he negotiated with our worst adversary at the height of the Cold War. He made deals with the Soviet Union that held, that reduced the risk, and that opened up channels that the two superpowers could talk. This is the kind of potential we now see in this deal.
Well, it's interesting. Then you can look 30 years later, Mark, and you're looking again at Russia under a different leader and a different threat, some think, to our country. So although Ronald Reagan was able to negotiate with the Soviet Union, we also have to look at where we are now and wonder, is that going to be the same place that we are with Iran? Go back, respond to Joe as our final comments, and we wrap up our conversation here about the North Korea deal, because again, that's more recent history, and it some say it can apply more here than going back to the Soviet Union as a model.
Jenna, that's exactly right. I mean, right after the signing of the agreed framework with North Korea, U.S. negotiators were predicting the implosion of the North Korean regime. So they said, don't worry about the flaws, don't worry about the details. The regime will be gone. Well, guess what? The regime stayed. It is now nuclear armed, and it is a serious national security threat. The difference is Ronald Reagan scared the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan maintained an offensive posture. Ronald Reagan used the credible threat of military force and aggression around the world to keep the Soviet Unions at bay. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, has this president's number. He's rolled him on all the major concessions. This program is not being dismantled. This program is being expanded. The pathways are not being cut. The pathways are being expanded. And Joe, one last point. The subprime documents were also 100 pages long, and they almost led to the economic implosion of the United States. A 100-page agreement doesn't mean it's a good agreement. It means it's a long agreement, and it doesn't mean it's a deeply flawed agreement.
Just a note on that, by the way, we've read some of the agreement here as we're all working through it, and it's tough. We're going to find out a lot more about this agreement over the next several days and weeks, because it takes a lot to go through. I know our viewers are going to be able to have access to that as well. So what happens now, Joe and Mark? Do you guys go out for coffee after this? I mean, what is this just a normal day in the office? I mean,
we're still good friends.
I know you guys are.
You bring it all to the show, Jenna. Bring it all to the show. Afterwards, we'll shake hands.
I know you will, and it's great to have both of your opinions. Again, no matter which way you see it, it's a historic day. So we'll take it all in, and we'll have you back, as we always do, as we learn more. Thank you to you both.
Thanks so much,
Jenna. Thank you, Joe.